They always made me feel like the extra. Not the spare, not the backup, not even the shadow, but the extra. Like the napkin no one asked for, folded neatly at the edge of a table already full. My name's Spencer. I'm 31 now, and I guess I should have seen it coming. When your mom looks at one of her kids like he hung the stars, and at the other like he left the back door open and let the cold in, you start to understand your place pretty young. My brother, Landon, is 29, 2 years younger, but somehow always treated like the oldest. The golden child, the chosen one, the walking Pinterest board of what a mother dreams her son will become. He had the baby photos framed in gold, his name on every Christmas ornament, and a whole shelf dedicated to his track ribbons and future CEO mugs. Meanwhile, mine were in a dusty shoebox under the stairs. I used to joke that if I ever went missing, they'd have to guess what I looked like from a yearbook someone else kept. Landon got everything growing up. I don't just mean attention or praise. I mean actual, tangible, write it down on paper everything. A fully funded trust fund that matured when he turned 21. An Ivy League education complete with a private apartment off campus and a monthly stipend to keep his mind on studies. And when he graduated, my parents bought him a house. A 4-bedroom colonial with a fenced-in backyard and a fully furnished office, so he could start his empire. Me? I worked nights at a gas station during college. I ate tuna out of cans and biked 5 miles to class in the snow because I couldn't afford parking. No trust fund, no monthly deposits, not even a decent winter coat. My mom's explanation when I asked about it once was, "Well, we didn't know if you'd make it through college, sweetie. We had to be strategic." Strategic. Like I was a bad investment they'd cut their losses on. Don't get me wrong. This isn't about money. Not entirely. This is about the way people who are supposed to love you can make you feel invisible. The way a mother can smile at one's son like he's her heartbeat and barely make eye contact with the other during dinner. The way a brother can bask in that spotlight and never once think to pull you in beside him. The worst part? Landon wasn't just the favorite. He knew he was the favorite, and he leaned into it. Hard. His smugness wasn't always loud. It was quiet, precise, designed to be deniable. Like when he'd say things like, "You know, Spencer, not everyone's meant to be a leader. Some of us are just better behind the scenes," while sipping from a wine glass at Christmas. Or when he'd pat me on the back after I mentioned a promotion and say, "That's great, man. Honestly, for someone who didn't go to a top school, that's impressive." Our family bought it. Hook, line, and goldenrod sinker. My mom. She beamed whenever he opened his mouth. "You always were my little genius," she'd say, practically melting into herself. My dad didn't say much. He wasn't really in the picture after the divorce. But even he once told me, "Your brother's gonna do big things. Just stay close to him, Spence. Might open some doors for you." Yeah, that hurt. So I did the only thing that made sense. I distanced myself. I moved out the second I could afford to, rented a crappy 1-bedroom, and started building something of my own. Quietly. While Landon flaunted his internship at a fancy firm and posted champagne selfies from rooftop bars, I kept my head down and poured everything into a small company I started with 2 friends from college. We bootstrapped it from nothing. First out of a garage, then a co-working space, then eventually our own office downtown. No family help. No shortcuts. No fanfare. The business took off, slowly at first, then all at once. Contracts, clients, revenue growth. We shifted, adapted, and eventually acquired a few smaller competitors. I took over operations, then strategy, then one day my co-founders handed me the keys and said, "You're the guy for this." I became CEO at 29. The same age Landon was when he finally decided to join the workforce after years of job hopping and finding himself. And fate, in all its twisted brilliance, handed me the sweetest twist of all. 6 months ago, we acquired the boutique marketing firm Landon worked at. They didn't publicize it. They didn't have to. We kept things smooth for PR, no layoffs, just a quiet restructuring under our umbrella brand. The teams got folded into ours, and everyone kept their jobs, including Landon. Same position, same pay. The difference? He now worked for me. Of course, he didn't know that. The org chart didn't show my name directly above his. I used a holding company to manage most of my assets, including our corporate acquisitions. I kept my identity out of internal HR paperwork for all subsidiaries to avoid exactly this kind of drama. I liked working in the background. Landon never cared to look beyond the logos anyway. As far as he was concerned, he worked for a really innovative firm with a forward-thinking vision. He even bragged about it to me once, not realizing I'd signed his paychecks that week. I didn't say a word. Not then. But I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Especially with my Uncle Robert's retirement party on the horizon. Uncle Rob wasn't rich, but he was beloved. A grizzled old electrician with a bad knee and a good heart. He had been the only adult in my life who ever really looked at me like I mattered. He gave me my first toolbox when I was 8. Taught me how to wire a light switch, patch drywall, replace a tire. Stuff my own dad never bothered with. He'd retired after 40 years on the job, and my cousins had thrown a massive backyard party in his honor. Dozens of relatives, catered barbecue, music, speeches, the works. I hadn't planned on going. I'd RSVP'd a polite, maybe, and figured I'd be too busy anyway. But when I found out Landon was going, and bringing a new girlfriend he was apparently serious about, I changed my mind. Something in me snapped. I wanted to see them. All of them. The whole proud little family circle. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe I wanted to show up in a nice car and a tailored suit just to feel, for once, like I belonged. Maybe I wanted to see if my mom would even notice me. Maybe I just wanted to look Landon in the eye and know that I held something he didn't even understand yet. The party was bigger than I expected. Huge white tents stretched across the backyard, string lights twinkling overhead, long tables filled with food, drinks, and laughing family members. Kids ran between legs. Music pulsed from a Bluetooth speaker, and my uncle sat grinning on a lawn chair like a king on his throne. I showed up alone, dressed sharp but not flashy, just enough to feel like armor. I brought a bottle of good bourbon as a gift and slipped it into the drinks table before heading toward my uncle. He lit up when he saw me. "Spencer, there's my guy," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like sawdust and cigar smoke. "Didn't think you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant it. For a while, it was good. Really good. I got pulled into conversations with cousins I hadn't seen in years. We laughed about old stories, how I accidentally nailed my shoe to the porch, how Landon cried when he lost at Monopoly and flipped the board. I drank a beer, ate too many ribs, let my guard down, and then I saw her, my mother, standing by the garden with a plastic cup of wine, smiling faintly as Landon waved his arm around in what looked like a story he'd told 100 times before. She looked good, honestly. Tired, maybe, but put together. Like someone who still cared deeply about appearances, even if the foundations were cracked. I approached slowly. She didn't notice me at first. Or maybe she did, and just pretended not to. Old habits. "Hey, Mom," I said quietly. She turned, blinked, and smiled, barely. "Spencer, you came," she said, as if it were a surprise. "I wasn't sure you'd, well, you know. You're always so busy." "Yeah." I made time. We talked for a minute or two. Small talk, safe topics. I asked about her garden. She asked if I was still working with those tech people. I didn't bother correcting her. Landon eventually turned toward us, and his face split into that familiar, easy grin. Well, look who decided to crawl out of his spreadsheet cave," he said, striding over. "Don't tell me you finally quit your side hustle and got a real job." There it was. That tone. Joking, but not. Teasing, but pointed. He looked at me like I was still the kid with holes in his sneakers and dirt under his fingernails. And that's when I decided, tonight's the night. But I didn't say it yet. Not then. No, I waited. I let him talk. I let him boast. I let him mock me in front of our cousins and swirl his drink like he owned the world. I let my mother nod along. I let the music swell. I let the sun dip low. I let it all build. Because I knew what was coming. And when it did, it would be loud. The thing about growing up overlooked is you start to become an expert at studying people from the sidelines. You read micro-expressions like second languages. You catch the shift in tone when someone starts talking to you like you're disposable. And you learn, without anyone ever teaching you, that silence doesn't mean peace. It means repression. And repression, left long enough, turns into rot. That party, it was rotting from the inside. After the passive-aggressive jabs from Landon, I drifted. Tried to find a space away from the spotlight where I could just exist. I stood by the grill with my cousin David for a while, talking about his new job. At least he remembered what I did. We even laughed a bit, until David's wife nudged him and said, "You should talk to Landon about getting in at his firm. Spencer, no offense, but Landon's place is, Like, really legit. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. No offense. It always came with that phrase, didn't it? Still, I played the part. Smiled. Nodded. Pretended I didn't just sign a budget that gave Landon's firm a funding boost that week. Then came the slideshow. At some point, my aunt decided it was time to play the family reel, the usual grainy montage of photos and home videos they'd compiled for Uncle Rob's big night. Chairs were pulled into rows, kids wrangled, paper plates tossed. I tried to fade into the back, but someone tapped my shoulder and said, "Come sit. We saved you a spot next to your mom." Of course they had. I squeezed into the folding chair, knees bumping hers. She barely glanced at me. The lights dimmed, and the first image popped up on the makeshift projector screen. A toddler Uncle Rob holding a wrench bigger than his arm. Everyone laughed. A few more slides rolled. Christmas photos, family vacations, 90s camcorder footage with timestamps in the corner. It was sweet for a while. Then came the detour. Suddenly, the slideshow shifted into next-generation memories. Apparently, someone had decided to include mini segments for all the kids and grandkids, a tribute to what Uncle Rob's legacy inspired. Cute, right? First up, Landon. The screen flashed a baby photo of him in footy pajamas, then one of him holding a gold medal at a high school track meet. More followed. Landon at his Ivy League graduation. Landon in front of his new house, keys in hand. Landon with a certificate from a prestigious leadership retreat. Landon at a company retreat in Napa. Landon smiling next to mom on his birthday, her arm wrapped around him like he was her lifeline. Each photo was met with ahs and soft chuckles. Someone said, "That boy is going places." Someone else clapped. I sat frozen, stomach clenched. Then the screen faded to black, and the next segment rolled. Emily, nurse and new mom. The caption read. Then Brian, firefighter in training. Then Ava, starting at state this fall. And then it was over. No mention of me. No photo. No caption. No slide. My name wasn't even spoken. The lights came back up. Everyone clapped. I sat in stunned silence, my hands clenching the sides of the folding chair until the metal dug into my palms. I didn't move. My mom turned to Landon and gave him a little squeeze on the arm. "Wasn't that sweet?" she whispered. I stood up and walked away. I don't even remember how I made it to the side yard, but I stood behind the tool shed for a good 5 minutes, trying to breathe. My chest felt tight, not because I wasn't included, but because I realized, right then and there, they didn't even think I needed to be. My accomplishments weren't just overlooked. They weren't real to them. I wasn't real to them. Not in the ways that mattered. I pulled out my phone and scrolled. Read emails. Looked at photos from our last company retreat. 30 employees on a hiking trip, arms raised in victory at the summit. I thought about the late nights, the missed birthdays, the grind, all of it. And none of it mattered to the people who were supposed to matter most. I wanted to leave. I almost did. I even got to my car and started the engine. But something stopped me. Not rage. Not pride. Something quieter. Something colder. I wanted them to know. Not just that I'd done okay. Not that I turned out fine. I wanted them to feel the weight of everything they'd missed. The enormity of it. The success they'd dismissed. The power they didn't know I held. I turned the engine off and walked back into the party. It was nearing sunset, and people were migrating to the backyard for toasts. Uncle Rob stood at a makeshift podium next to a string of tiki torches, holding a beer and looking like he'd just won the lottery. My aunt was crying. People were hugging. Glasses clinking. It should have been a beautiful moment. But of course, Landon couldn't help himself. He waited until the attention faded a little. Then he sauntered over to a small circle where I was standing with two of my younger cousins, talking about entrepreneurship. They were asking me questions, real, thoughtful ones, and I could tell they were genuinely curious. It felt good, until Landon cut in. "Careful," he said, grinning. "Spencer will have you thinking selling Pokemon cards on eBay is a business model." The group laughed, hesitantly. One cousin kind of half-smiled, unsure. I didn't flinch. "You're not wrong," I said calmly. "Just depends if you scale." He snorted. "Right. Remind me again, what is it you do now? Consulting? Something with apps?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and I smiled. "You work for me," I said. He blinked. The laughter died. Someone choked on their drink. I didn't say it loudly. I didn't need to. The words hit like a brick in a glass house. "What?" he said, his voice cracking just slightly. I said, You work for me. The firm you joined? The one you keep talking about at dinner parties? We bought them 6 months ago. I signed the acquisition papers myself. He laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. The panicked kind. The kind that asks if this is a prank. No, you're joking, he said, looking around. This is a joke, right? I shook my head. Not a joke. You've been reporting through a series of managers who all fall under a shell corporation I control. I'm the CEO. Check your pay stub. He stared at me, mouth slightly open. No sound. Then the storm hit. He exploded. You're lying. There's no way. You're not. You don't have that kind of money. You're not that smart. His voice rose. People turned. Conversations paused. I saw my mom look over, confused. Uncle Rob stopped mid-toast. The music cut off. It was like the air went still. You're nothing, Landon hissed, stepping closer. You always wanted to be me. You were jealous. You still are. Look at you, trying to play big man in a suit. Acting like you've done something special. You just what? Got lucky. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. He turned, flailing for validation. Mom, tell him. Tell him this is ridiculous. Spencer doesn't own anything. He barely passed algebra. And my mother, stood there with her wine cup trembling slightly in her hand. She looked at me, and then at Landon. She said nothing, not a word. And that silence? That cut deeper than anything Landon had just screamed. He kept going, sputtering nonsense about lies and manipulation, and how could this be real? And this isn't fair. Until a new voice cut through the crowd like a blade. My grandfather, a man of few words, steelworker for 40 years, widowed early, never said more than he had to. But when he spoke, people listened. He rose slowly from his chair, cane in one hand, the other raised slightly for silence. Landon, he said, voice gravelly. Sit down. Everyone froze. Landon stared. Grandpa, you don't understand. I said sit down, he repeated. And Landon did. There was a long, excruciating pause. Then Grandpa looked at me and said a single sentence. The sentence that changed everything. You always were the one paying attention. The whole backyard fell silent. And in that moment, I realized something had shifted. But it wasn't over yet. Not even close. The morning after the party, I woke up feeling like I'd been cracked open and left in the sun. Not hungover, just hollow. My apartment, usually quiet in a way I found comforting, felt too still, like the silence had grown legs and started watching me. I sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like an hour, replaying everything. Landon's outburst. My mother's silence. Grandpa's sentence. You always were the one paying attention. That line clung to me like a second skin. It echoed, not just because it was the only public recognition I'd ever gotten from someone in my family, but because of what it meant. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the company. It was about how I'd always watched, listened, adapted. While everyone was busy spotlighting Landon, I'd been building. Alone. In the quiet. And yet, even with Grandpa's words still fresh, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt small. Because after the party, my mother hadn't come to talk to me. Not once. She'd gone straight to Landon. I'd watched them from across the yard. He was red in the face, arms flailing in fury, and she held him like he was the one who'd been betrayed. Like he was the victim. She rubbed his back and whispered something in his ear. When her eyes flicked to me, they were cold. Not confused. Not curious. Cold. It wasn't denial. It was rejection. She knew. And she didn't care. And in that moment, any tiny flicker of hope that she might see me, really see me, just died. That was my rock bottom. Not the years of being forgotten, or the slideshow snub, or even Landon screaming that I was nothing. No, it was the realization that even after all of it, even when the truth slapped her across the face in front of 50 people, my mother chose him. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stopped. For 3 days, I didn't go into the office. I canceled meetings, told my assistant to hold my calls, and went radio silent on every platform. I stared at my living room ceiling for hours. Ate ramen noodles like I was 20 again. I even found myself scrolling through old family photos I had buried in a digital folder called Stuff. In one of them, I was maybe 10, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a Christmas tree, holding up a Lego set with a grin so wide my cheeks were red. Landon was behind me, in focus, holding up a new gaming console. The camera had centered him. I was blurred, off to the side. Of course I was. But that photo? I kept looking at it. Because despite being out of focus, I looked happy. I looked free. Like I didn't know I wasn't the favorite yet. Like I still believed the world could be fair. Something about that struck me. And maybe that's where the rebuilding began. Not in some dramatic training montage or a big epiphany in the ring. Just in the quiet recognition that I was done chasing validation. I wasn't going to win her over. I wasn't going to be the golden child. That chapter? It was closed. Burned, actually. So I started writing a new one. I went back to the office that Friday. Walked in at 7:45 a.m. before most of the team arrived. I brewed my own coffee, sat at my desk, and opened a blank page. Not for a memo, not a presentation, just a journal. First entry, what now? And the answer? Growth. But this time for me. I poured myself into the business, not as a distraction, but as a declaration. We had plans for expansion into the European market, and I decided to lead the strategy personally. I flew out to Berlin, met with partners face-to-face, and built a pipeline that doubled our quarterly projections. I started mentoring some of our junior hires, not for PR or LinkedIn optics, but because I remembered what it was like to be invisible in a room full of people who mattered. I wanted someone else to feel seen. I also got serious about myself. Started running every morning, not to punish myself into fitness, but to burn off the weight of everyone else's expectations. 30 minutes a day, headphones in, heart pounding. I wasn't chasing anything. I was moving forward. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. I was just being. The funny thing is, when you stop needing approval, people start noticing you. Investors, industry peers, even the press. Our acquisition streak caught the attention of a major tech journal, and before I knew it, they were asking for an interview. I almost said no. But something in me, maybe that kid with the blurry Lego set, wanted to be heard. So I said yes. It was a long-form piece. They came to the office, took photos, followed me through meetings, and asked real questions. I was honest. I didn't name-drop Landon or mention the family drama. But I talked about building from scratch, about resilience, about leadership without fanfare. When the article went live, it made the rounds. The quiet architect of the new generation of mid-sized titans. Cringy headline, but the story resonated. A few days later, I got a text. From Landon. Just one line. Wow. Must be nice to have a publicist now. I stared at it for a while. Then I blocked his number. I didn't need to respond. But the real turning point, the real rise, didn't come from the business or the article. It came 6 weeks after the party when I got a call from my grandfather. He didn't say much, just that he wanted to talk. Man to man. I met him at his house, the same one he'd lived in for 40 years. He made coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon, and we sat in his backyard under a frayed patio umbrella while birds argued in the trees overhead. I saw that article, he said after a long silence. Good read. Thanks, I said. I didn't expect it to take off. He nodded, stirred his coffee, didn't look at me when he said, You know, your grandmother always said there was something in your eyes. Sharpness, stillness, like you were watching a storm roll in before anyone else saw the clouds. I didn't know what to say. He leaned back. I didn't speak up enough when you were young. Thought it wasn't my place. Thought your parents would figure it out. He paused. But they didn't. More silence. Then, and that's on them. Not you. I sat there, throat tight, and for the first time in years, I felt the dam crack just a little. Not enough to cry, but enough to breathe deeper. He looked at me then. You built something that'll outlast all of us. You hear me? That matters. I nodded. Thanks, Grandpa. And if your brother ever shows up asking for favors. I laughed. I'll handle it. He grinned. I know you will. That conversation was short, but it cemented something in me. I wasn't the extra anymore. I was the foundation. I left his house feeling lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just steady. But of course, peace doesn't last long in families like mine. 3 days later, I got a call from HR. Hey Spencer, sorry to bother you. Landon's manager just flagged something. He's demanding a reassignment and threatening to sue for a hostile work environment. Says you ambushed him at a family party and that he's being targeted. I sighed. Tell legal to prep a response. I said, I'll handle it. Because of course Landon wasn't going to let it go. Of course he had to make it about him. Of course he had to try and spin this. But what he didn't realize was, the game had changed. He didn't know what I had planned next. And this time, I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. There's a moment right before a storm when everything goes still. The wind hushes. The sky flattens into a dull gray. Birds disappear. It's not peace, it's pressure. It's the universe holding its breath before the thunder breaks. That's what it felt like when I got Landon's HR complaint. Not anger, not anxiety, just stillness. Because I realized something right then, I wasn't in a fight anymore. I was in control. And the difference between fighting and controlling is simple. Fighters swing wildly. Controllers pick their moment. And I was done swinging. When the HR director finished reading me Landon's formal statement, complete with exaggerated claims of verbal abuse and professional sabotage, I sat in silence for a beat, then said, "Thank you. That'll be all for now." She paused. "Should we open a case file?" "No," I said. "Not yet." Then I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Because Landon had just made his biggest mistake. He gave me permission to go on offense. Let's rewind a little. After the retirement party, word got around. It wasn't immediate. My family wasn't exactly glued to the Wall Street Journal, but enough people saw the article, and enough cousins whispered to enough aunts that by week 3, the phone started ringing. Some called to congratulate. Most called to gossip. But one call stood out. My cousin Ben. Ben worked in compliance at a major financial firm. Sharp guy. Never took sides in family drama. But he'd been at the party, and he'd seen Landon's meltdown firsthand. "Hey," he said, "you ever look into Landon's role at your company? Like really look into it?" I frowned. Not directly. We usually don't micromanage individual hires post-acquisition unless there's a red flag. "Well," he said, "I was just thinking. Some of the stuff he was saying at the party, the way he was throwing your company name around, bragging about being a strategic lead and dropping hints about restructuring decisions, that didn't sit right." I opened my laptop. "Send me whatever you've got," I said. Ben chuckled. "Oh, I didn't collect dirt. That's your job now." So I started digging. What I found didn't surprise me. Not really. Landon's entire tenure at the acquired firm had been padded. He'd talked his way into a strategic advisor role by charming the old CEO at some networking event. Zero actual responsibilities. No KPIs. His emails were 80% buzzwords and 20% vague memos about pivoting narratives. In short, he was dead weight. But more than that, he'd been overstepping, CCing clients on internal brainstorms, suggesting strategy shifts without approval. At least twice, he'd booked meetings with partner brands and introduced himself as an executive stakeholder, which he absolutely was not. The final straw? A forwarded message from one of our senior VPs. Landon had emailed her, CCNG a client, and offered to personally oversee a digital rollout he had no clearance for. The VP shut it down fast, but flagged it in her weekly report. I checked the date. 4 days before the party. Perfect. I looped in my COO, Dina. She's precise, no nonsense, and not remotely sentimental. When I told her everything, she didn't flinch. "So," she said, "you want to terminate?" "Eventually," I said. "But not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "You've got something bigger in mind." I nodded. "I want him to feel it first. Not just lose a job. I want him to understand why." Dina sat back and crossed her arms. "Walk me through it." So I did. Step 1. Isolate the liability. We couldn't afford to have Landon making more unauthorized decisions or confusing clients. So we quietly reassigned his projects to other team leads. Not with a demotion, just a gentle redirection. Company-wide process audit, Dina told the managers. Temporary restructuring. Make sure no one's overlapping roles unnecessarily. It was clean. No red flags. By the time Landon noticed, he had no more meetings on his calendar. His emails started bouncing back with auto replies like, "This topic is being handled by the strategy ops team. Thanks." Step 2. Set the trap. I told HR to schedule a mediation meeting. We framed it as a conflict resolution session, a chance for Landon and I to clear the air after the family incident. He agreed immediately. Probably thought he could fake an apology, save face, and spin it into leverage. Perfect. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. I started counting down. In the meantime, I made moves. I met with legal, reviewed our severance clauses, confirmed Landon had signed the standard onboarding contract when the acquisition happened, complete with clauses around misrepresentation, abuse of title, and brand damage. We had him dead to rights. But I wasn't done. Step 3. The dossier. I compiled a comprehensive performance report. Not just emails, screenshots, calendar inconsistencies, client confusion logs, even Slack threads where he'd made tone-deaf jokes in company-wide chats. It was damning, but objective. No personal jabs. Just data. When Dina saw the folder, she whistled. You could bury a senator with this. That's the plan, I said. Then came step 4, the message. This was the most delicate part. I called my grandfather. We met for lunch, neutral ground, an old diner with cracked booths and bottomless coffee. He wore a windbreaker even though it was warm, and I could tell from the look in his eyes that he already knew something was coming. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to be honest. Shoot, he said. If I go through with this, if I take Landon down the way he deserves to go down, will you see me differently? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stirred his coffee, then said, You remember when you were 12 and built that treehouse out of scrap wood? It wasn't square. It leaked. But you spent 3 weeks on it. I smiled faintly. Yeah. You didn't build it to compete with your brother. You built it because you needed a space that was yours. He looked at me then. Hard. This isn't about revenge, Spencer. It's about building the kind of space you should have had all along. If Landon can't handle the roof collapsing, that's on him. You didn't make the beams weak. He did. I nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, he added. And that was all I needed. The day of the meeting came fast. Landon showed up 5 minutes late. No tie. Just smugness and a button-down. He gave me a mock-sincere smile as he took the seat across from me. Spencer, he said, glad we're doing this. It's important to resolve tension in a healthy, professional way. HR nodded. That's exactly the goal. I didn't speak. I just slid the dossier across the table. Landon blinked, flipped it open. As he turned the pages, the smirk started to crack. Unauthorized client emails, fabricated titles, redundant projects, even a memo where he copied content from a Medium blog post and claimed it as original strategy. By the end, he was pale. What is this? He asked. Not angry, just exposed. Your file? I said. Calm. Measured. I wanted you to see it before we make it official. HR cleared her throat. We'll be reviewing next steps over the coming days, but this behavior constitutes a breach of multiple internal policies. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're doing this because of Mom. Because of the party. No, I said. I'm doing this because you're a risk to the company. And I'm done pretending you're not. He stood abruptly. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said, standing too. But it makes me smarter. And in this room, that's enough. He stormed out. HR exhaled. Dina, who'd been watching silently through the glass, gave me a nod as I passed. We weren't done yet. But the setup? The setup was complete. Now, all that remained was the final move. And trust me, it was going to be checkmate. Revenge, when it's done right, doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes with silence. With doors closing quietly behind you. With people realizing, too late, that the world doesn't revolve around them anymore. I didn't want to destroy Landon. I wanted him to understand that he was never untouchable. That his last name didn't make him bulletproof. That the world he thought he inherited by birthright was actually built, by hand, by the brother he mocked and dismissed for 3 decades. The day after our meeting, Landon took personal leave. I knew he would. His ego was bruised, and he needed time to spin the narrative. I heard through back channels that he was telling people it was all a misunderstanding, that he was the real victim of corporate politics. He even posted a vague Instagram story, a photo of a whiskey glass with the caption, "Sometimes being the lion means walking alone." Cute. But I wasn't done yet. First, I spoke to legal. We couldn't fire Landon publicly without risking an unnecessary PR mess. He was too tied into social circles that overlapped with some of our clients. So instead, I offered him a deal. HR sent a formal notice of intent to terminate, citing policy breaches and brand misrepresentation. We gave him 2 options: resign quietly and take a basic severance package, or stay, fight it, and risk a full investigation into his conduct, which could include public disclosures, interviews, and access to his digital history. He folded fast. His resignation letter arrived 2 days later, filled with forced gratitude and hollow professionalism. He even tried to include a paragraph about how he hoped to return someday with more experience. Dina laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. We signed it, archived it, and moved on. Internally, I made an announcement that one of our strategic hires had decided to explore new opportunities. No name, no drama, just a neat, clean end to the Landon chapter. But revenge isn't just about endings. It's about revelations. I wasn't going to go nuclear. That wasn't my style. But I wanted one more moment. One final mirror held up to the people who spent their lives pretending I wasn't worth looking at. So I planned a dinner. A formal one. For family. I booked a private dining room at one of the nicest restaurants in the city. A sleek rooftop spot with warm lighting, velvet chairs, and a view that made you feel like you owned the skyline. I sent the invites out a week in advance. I invited my mother, my grandfather, aunts, uncles, cousins, even Landon. I didn't expect him to come, but I wanted to give him the chance. Let him see, just once, the full picture. The night arrived. People showed up dressed in their best. Confused, curious, nervous. My mother arrived wearing pearls she'd saved for weddings. My grandfather wore his old suit jacket. He gave me a nod as I greeted them at the door. Everyone took their seats. The wine flowed. Appetizers were served. I stood slowly, raised a glass, and cleared my throat. I want to thank you all for coming, I said. It means more than you know. People murmured, smiling politely. I also want to share something tonight. Something most of you didn't know until recently. And maybe didn't want to know. I paused. My name is Spencer Hawthorne. I'm the CEO of Halbridge Ventures. In the last 4 years, we've gone from 3 people in a garage to an international firm with over 200 employees, 8 acquisitions, and 5 regional offices. Gasps. Murmurs. My mother stiffened. One of my uncles blinked slowly, then whispered, "Wait, you're Halbridge?" I continued. You may know that we recently acquired Brandridge Media. What you probably don't know is that Landon was one of their employees. And until last week, he worked directly under my leadership. Dead silence. I let it hang in the air. After a thorough review of his conduct, I added, he chose to resign. No hard feelings. But I thought the family deserved some clarity. My mother set her wine down, hand trembling. Someone near the end of the table said, "Wow." I sat back down. And that was it. No gloating. No insults. Just truth. Clean. Sharp. Final. After dinner, people approached me one by one. Some apologized. Others asked questions. A few just said they were proud. But my mother? She didn't say anything. She sat at the table, quiet as stone, her face unreadable. Until the end of the night. As the guests trickled out, she stood beside me near the elevator. We were alone for a moment. She looked tired. Older than I remembered. I didn't know, she said softly. About the company. About any of it. I nodded. I know. You should have told me. No, I said. You should have asked. She didn't reply. After a long silence, she said, he's struggling. Landon. This broke something in him. I looked at her, calm and steady. Then maybe it's time he learns what struggle feels like. She flinched. Just barely. And I left it at that. I heard from Landon one more time. A short email, weeks later. Congrats. You win. Just remember who they'll always love more. I didn't respond. Because love given out of habit isn't love worth chasing. Months passed. Our company expanded into new regions. I hired a new strategist, one of our interns, actually. Bright, focused, humble. The culture shifted. Less bravado, more collaboration. I started a mentorship program. Built a team that didn't care about titles, only effort. And me? I felt lighter. No more need to prove anything. No more anger. Just peace. The revenge had worked, but not because Landon suffered. Because I didn't. Because I was free. And the people who once looked through me, now they looked up. But the most powerful moment came 6 months later, during a quiet lunch with my grandfather. We sat on his porch, watching the wind move through the trees. You did it, he said simply. I nodded. Then he added, so what now? I looked out at the sky. Calm. Still. Peaceful. And I said, now I build something bigger.